Right, recording in progress. Right.
Got it.
Okay. I thought quite a lot of interesting stuff, but a lot, as I said, backed into the thing. I took in a bit more than I did when I watched the first time. I think the first time I was a bit tired. Few surprising things that I thought the wheel was a bit older than they mentioned in this video.
Yep.
I thought the ancient Egyptians had the wheel already.
No,
Anybody
they
know
didn't.
anything about that?
No, the
It wasn't
Egyptians
ancient
never developed
Egyptian
the
like 4,000 years BC.
Egyptians did not invent the wheel. They actually adopted it from the Hittites when they went to war with them.
Sorry, say that again, Jenny.
The Egyptians did not invent the wheel, but they learned about the existence of the wheel when they went to war with the Hittites, because the Hittites had chariots, and the Egyptians sort of learned about the wheel from that.
Okay, would that have been more than 2000 BC, or would it have
I
been?
don't know the dates.
Okay.
I don't know the dates, but the Egyptians, it's always something which people say is unusual, considering how advanced they were, that they never invented the wheel. So the evidence seems to be that they sort of acquired the wheel from the Hittites, who were from original what now is Turkey. And he mentioned the Hittites a couple of times.
And the other thing which is sort of new to me, or there's quite a lot, but one of the things is corded ware. What does that term mean? Is it like just a style of pottery, or what is it?
Yeah, it's a type of pottery that they follow, that they've used to identify the routes that groups took across Europe as they migrated westwards and northwards.
Okay.
I don't know the details, but there are different descriptions because they find the same sort of underlying patterns, and then they can follow the migration routes.
Interesting thing. Talking about the invention of the wheel, I read just the other day that about the only people in the world who did not invent the wheel were, in fact, the Native Americans. Apparently, all over Australia, and you know, a lot of what we consider to be the sort of lesser, should I say, educated, lesser civilized people, they invented the wheel all over the world, except for the Native Americans for some reason or other. And I just wondered, why did the Native Americans not need the wheel? Because obviously it was invented from need.
Yeah, I think maybe mostly the Native Americans were very sort of hunter-gatherers, and the wheel was probably more useful if you were staying in one place and growing crops.
Yes, yes, that makes sense. Another thing that interested me was that the women fetching water. And now, why is it? That seems to be another thing which is fairly universal around the world. Well, it used to be, where it's the woman's job to fetch the water.
Well, it fits in with the sort of gender roles, because they talk about hunter-gatherers. Basically, the men were the hunters and the women were the gatherers. So they gathered water, they gathered berries, and they still do in some of the sort of existing or remaining hunter-gatherer groups. And the men were the ones who went off to actually find animals and kill them.
Then to get the meat, yeah.
They were perceived as stronger. So that's not unusual.
Okay, it's okay. I get that.
One of the interesting things I heard was he saying that horses originated in the steppes. Because I've heard somewhere, and I don't know the details, that there's some evidence that both camels and horses originally originated in North America. But I don't know the details about how they know this, or how they maybe got from North America into Asia. But it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about that. By the way,
yeah, no, you'd have to Google it. I don't know the details. So it's one of these things somebody just mentions as a side thing, and you think, oh, that sounds interesting.
But this guy seems fairly sort of scientific in his approach. He's kept on referring to his research papers and so on. So I think he wouldn't mention stuff. He wasn't fairly sure of the sort of scientific reasoning behind it.
The thing is, not every scientific paper comes up with either reliable data, even if it's published, but it also often have a viewpoint. So, he's presenting papers, but there may be other papers that have, different evidence. And so, this is the thing with academic things. You always have to question and look at the sources and not take it for granted.
I do have a transcript of this video, just the text, which was very nicely, beautifully punctuated and by ChatGPT, artificial intelligence. And what's so fantastic about it and time-saving is it gets all the spelling of these obscure names of people and words and terms. It corrects all that, where the automated transcript system just hears a sound and sometimes often just spells it as it sounded. You've got to sit and scratch your head and figure out what the hell the word was intended to be. And ChatGPT sorts it out one shot. It saves hours.
Sensitive to transcripts. I noticed that, and the transcripts there were excellent on this one. Excellent transcript.
So that can be shared with everyone if they want it.
Yeah, I think I did. I think I sent that transcript out.
Did you send it out? Okay.
I think I did. I think I attached it. Yeah. But I'll check, and if I haven't, I'll do it again.
I'll send you the list of attendees for this evening anyway. I think we were 9.
Yeah, I've got the attendees.
Have you got it?
Got 9 at the moment.
All right, Mick, what did you think?
I'm not sure about it all. It was very interesting. I thought I'm a bit as normal confused. I thought I was going to be seeing something about habitability of planets, but is that the next or the last video? But it was very interesting.
I take your point, Derek, about a huge amount of information squashed into a short time. I find the same with most of these, particularly in cosmology, things like that, where you're sort of thrown into a graph which has a few layers to it and so on, and you sweep past that and to pick up information from graphs and also when you have anyway, I'm going on now unnecessarily, but I take your point there, Derek, about a huge amount of information.
Yeah, it's just that so we need to sit down, and because a lot of this is new to me, so one needs to make notes and go, as Jenny says, we need to go and Google this and Google that, and when was the wheel? What are the theories about the invention of the wheel? What are the theories about where the horse originated, and so on? Was it only one spot, or was it various spots around the?
Obviously, I shall do some work on that.
Sorry, Jenny, catch that?
Well, I was just thinking this lecture which he basically gave is the sort of thing one would have sat through at university and madly trying to write everything down. And now these days, the students have transcripts and they don't have to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
I must say it gave some context to some of the global, when you sort of think back and you think you're going back to the beginning of time with the sort of Gaza, Israeli, Palestine, those sort of issues, and they just little pieces of I think if any graph would contextualize it, it's what the populations were in those sort of times, because to have seen the globe go from 3 billion to 8 billion just in the course of 50 years of post-university, and to think that can double again in the same amount of time. There were very few people in a lot of those, seemed to be more languages than people almost. So it was I don't know, I think it's just amazing that they can get all that into those sort of pictures.
Also, genetics is what really sort of gives it credibility.
Yeah.
Actually, when they can do genetic testing and you can pick up patterns, it's much more reliable than the sort of information you can get from stones or things from language.
Yeah.
That just adds to it. But the genetics, I think, is a very sort of basic undeniable amount of information or type of information.
So the general thing about, having common words across several different sort of cultures and so on, but it makes sense, because it is really one large area there. But what interests me is, again, what I mentioned before we started. The word in Zulu for where is, where is somebody, where is something. The word in Zulu is ubi.
Mm.
And you have exactly the same word in Latin with the same meaning. In two completely disparate parts of the world, the same word with the same meaning in different languages, completely different cultures and languages, places in the world. How does that happen? So that sort of piques my curiosity a bit, and I'd like to know from an expert a bit more about stuff like that.
It would be interesting to hear or read about the sort of similar studies that have been done on these Indo-European things, but on African, sub-Saharan African languages.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
And finding where the similarities are, because all I know about the sort of Bantu migration was that they came from sort of eastern Nigeria and the Congo area, and then moved east and south. But what was their connection and their interaction with Arabic people, in North Africa? Because 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a grassland, so there must have been a lot of, not 5,000, but not that long ago. There was much wide, the desert wasn't as extensive as it is now. So there was probably much more in the way of trade and contact with the Europeans, if you like, or people from the Mediterranean. So
I saw a recent video which was discussing genetic research on ancient Egyptians. It showed them very closely genetically linked to the sort of Central African tribal populations.
Yeah,
very closely. And then also, I mean, there's all sorts of things. If you look at there was the Ethiopian Jewish sect from very, very long ago, which is not just like a recent thing where some African tribe has decided to become Jewish. It comes along for a couple of thousand years. It's ancient.
Yeah. And also, if you travel from northern Egypt, which is very Arabic, the people look very Arab. If you go south towards Aswan and places, you can see the people aren't just darker; they tend to be slightly more Negroid. Not in the full sense, if you like, but they've got.
You had that. What was the sort of culture called in between?
The Nubians.
Nubians, that's right. Yeah.
And even as interestingly, talking about the Egyptians, old Ramesses II, who was the guy who fought the Hittites. His statues of himself in the further south in Egypt are much more Negroid in their characteristics than the statues of him in the northern part of Egypt. So he's obviously trying to sort of fit in with the locals. And so obviously there would have been mixing with sub-Saharan groups with the Arab North Africans over time. So this is where genetics is important, because then you get much more detail on where the mixing has happened. But it would be interesting to look at the whole African language areas, and you see what are the similarities, say, between Kikuyu in Kenya and maybe Zulu or Venda, this south.
It's interesting if you Credo Mutwa, who was the one of the last great Zulu shamans, he actually wrote Indaba My Children, I think it was called, and that covers the whole. He put in writing what was not meant to be ever written, and it led to his son's death because they felt that he betrayed the kind of verbal tradition of passing down history. But in that he covers all the pygmies, and those sort of tribes seem to start, and there was all the singing nations, very similar, in fact, a lot to like the Aborigines, the way they could actually have songs. Those ley lines everybody knew where people came from what songs they sang. So it's not just, we tend, I think, to measure things in wheels and things that have developed what we consider culture, but in a lot of that early history, it's much more around passing on intuitive feeling and tracking, and so there's a lot of levels to these things.
Another thing that was interesting to me when he was talking about the Anatolian the sort of Greek origin from the Anatolian people. Now, the Anatolians, aren't they Turkish, actually?
Yeah, that's Turkey.
And what I remember from visiting Greece and Turkey is the sort of distinct or rather palpable animosity between the Turks and Greeks.
Yeah.
You know, sort of the Greeks claiming some of the islands in between them and the Turks claiming the same islands and all sorts of things going on. And but it seems they're actually all the same people, really. I mean, you find a lot of this, you know, things like yogurt. You have all the same things in both cultures, even though the one is sort of Islamic culture mostly, and the other one is totally different.
Yeah. Well, Derek, the saddest correlation relating to that is that genetically, the people who live in Gaza and the people who live in Israel have the same genes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they're not. They are actually the same people who have a different history and a different religious thing, but they're actually genetically from the same source. And it's really sad. That just makes it even sadder.
And what I think is even sadder is the majority of the people in Israel, probably, and the majority of the people in Palestine, they all want to live with each other. It's just the blooming politicians that are messing everything.
Yeah, well, that's moving into politics. But genetically, they're not. You know, they're not separate groups. They're actually from the same. They're the same genetically. But
they're cousins. They're cousins. Even in the Bible, they're cousins.
I think there is the root of it. It is the very the religious difference. I think is the biggest problem in that area.
Yeah, well, not just in there. That's just a sort of. It's just sort of the biggest example. But I think the Turkish Greeks, you know, who own Cyprus type thing. I think it's got more recent historic roots or causes. Miller.
And now, getting back to the languages, what puzzles me here, and he didn't mention very much about it, was the Celtic languages. They don't seem to have, as far as I know, as far as I can gather, they've got very little in common with the Indo-European languages. How did that happen? Do you know, Jenny?
Vikings.
He did mention a couple of words which were fairly common.
Yeah.
To
well, the Celtic languages, as far as I understand, actually link up with Portugal.
Celtic.
If you look at northern Portugal and northwestern Spain, their local character, they have a Celtic tradition. And again, if you look at the route that people took, across from Greece to Italy to France to Spain to Portugal, they then moved north into Britain. I think people used to think it was the other way around, that the Celts were in Great Britain, if you like, an island, and then for whatever reason they took their cultures and it went south. But I understand this corded ware thing that Derek mentioned suggests that in fact the route was from Portugal upwards, northwards. So that's something worth looking into.
There was a considerable Celtic influence in France, of course, wasn't there?
Yeah. But that, I mean, this is not a field I'm very familiar with. I just pick up these odd things when I watch things on television.
So the other culture that's very interesting, of course, in that region is the Basques. And there's actually a video on the Basques and their whole history and the culture and so on came up after I'd watched this. It just the way YouTube's decide, oh, you're interested in that, so you must be interested in this. And it was actually, I didn't have time to look at it. I just watched the first couple of minutes. But that's something I want to know more about, because the Basque language and culture is it's in between Spain and France.
Yeah.
But it's not similar to any culture or language in Spain or France.
Yeah, and apparently the same is fairly true of the Hungarian language. It has very little, and he mentioned that it's different from the others around it. And the same is for the Finnish language. It's completely different from the other Scandinavian languages and Russian.
And I think languages emerge, even if you look at the African languages today, the difference between Sotho and Zulu, so many of the Zulu words, for instance, are adopted from English. You know, you get isikoleni for school, and because it was mainly a English-speaking, what you would call it, colonization, I suppose they'd call it. Whereas the Sotho words are largely Afrikaans, much more because they were more in the Free State and that sort of area. So, you know, in Zulu itself, there are like 14 different words for fire, where we'd have one, because in their functional thing, whether it was a bushfire or a little kindling fire for warmth or a cooking fire, you know, they're all totally different concepts of importance. Whereas we've just brought in a fork and a knife and a few things like that, which become adoptive words. So those, and even up there where you're mentioning with the Spanish, the Franco, and you know, in walking the Camino, you realize that what actually made all of those things, it wasn't actually the East-West movement of things, it was the fact that it was the North-South Muslim-Christian kind of issues that made the Catalonia actually join together to kind of fight the Moors. So it was, you know, the music and that followed. So you get that Celtic music in Spanish and you get it in Irish. And, you know, so it kind of goes north-south with the boats, I suppose. But it was also to do with wars and those sort of issues as well.
There's clearly lots for us to go and Google.
Yeah.
There's so much material here.
The influence genetically from Africa is quite prevalent in the sort of southern Spain and Italy and all those places too. That's just a natural sort of migration and mixing.
Yeah.
From north of Africa.
Southern Spain, of course, has the additional invasion, if you like to call it that, of the Moroccans.
Yeah, but that's much more recent. That's within the last century, the last millennium. With Islam.
Yeah.
That's sorry, I need to go, so I'm going to have to say thank you very much, Peter, and everyone. It's been very interesting.
Yes, I found it very interesting. Yes, it is. It's complicated. I've still got to find out who the Yamnaya people were. I've never heard of the Yamnaya before, but yeah, that's.
Yeah, I quickly Googled it and looked at the Wikipedia thing while we were watching the video, but it doesn't tell you much more than this guy was telling you. It's just an ancient culture from a few thousand, and their sort of culture, what they did, covered themselves with ochre when they were buried and things like that. So yeah, you just get more of the same, but probably you get bit more detail, but not much more. But it's also the first time I've heard that name. Very interesting, Peter.
Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. It was the most interesting video to me, and also a good discussion afterwards.
Yeah.
All right, Peter, I'll send you a video. I'll upload the video of the discussion and send you a link.
Yeah, I've got the video of the talk.
Of
yes,
this discussion, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay,
right.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks for your help.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye.
Hi, Pete. Hi, what did you think of it, Pete?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, first of all, time caught up with me. I apologise. I missed the first 30 minutes of it. But it's a little bit like you said. There's a lot to take in, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to it all again, I think. But it's very interesting. I'm afraid history was never one of my better subjects at school. But it's something I think you develop an interest as you get a bit older.
I think there's a lot of this info that came out in this video is actually relatively new research and so on. You refer to fairly recent papers and so on, sort of 21, 23, that sort of just recent stuff.
Yeah.
All right, but we'll send you the transcript as well, of course. That can make it a bit easier just to go and quickly check up on some facts that were mentioned.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Derek. That was very interesting.
All right.
Yeah.
This is Peter's baby, the study group, by the way. All right. Cheers, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.
The recording, the session.